Thanks so much for speaking with me today. And in particular, this is a really big year for the anniversary of, I know at least for me, it's one of the most formative albums. And I just wanted to ask to start off with, Firestorm is often regarded as a seminal album. Can you share some insights on how this album came together and what it meant to you personally and for the band's message at that time?
It's pretty much the record that put our band on the map. And I think it set the tone for everything that followed when it came to how we wrote our songs, how we carried ourselves, and the messages that we were forwarding. So for me, it was a huge victory because it had taken me from age 18 to age 21 to get a lineup together where everyone was vegan straight edge, everyone was a capable musician and composer, and had the tenacity to be able to carry those ideals and stand their ground.
And that's a huge theme in that is that standing your ground. How much more important is it to stand your ground nowadays?
Well, I think the big difference between 1990s and now and normalization of drugs. There's some doctors that the major pharmaceutical corporations are essentially pushing on the public, and what the drug cartels are involved in. I think back then people wanted a war against the cartels that our government wasn't willing to wage. It was a slogan, but they weren't really willing to go in and do what was necessary to stop the flow. And in other countries, I mean, I've been in other parts of the world where the drug plague is handled much differently. And it, it's not, it doesn't have the kind of effect on society that it does here when the fire is essentially allowed to burn. There's more addicts, there's more crime that follows it, there's more chaos in the streets that accompanies it. And we see that here, we see that in LA, we see it in Portland and Seattle and these other cities when we play. And I realize a lot of it has to do with the mercilessness of capitalism. It breaks people. And a lot of it has to do with untreated mental illness and people who experience. But the drug cartels and the people that work for them, I think they're doing the devil's work on earth. And it's the same thing with the major pharmaceutical companies. Like drug use is so widespread now that it literally is normalized. One of my friends is a teacher, and he asked me to come and speak to his class. And one of his colleagues was offended that I was going to be in their school because she felt that I was judgmental. Oh, well, is he against marijuana use? Blah, 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 all this other stuff. And I thought that was pretty sad. But I also think that it was very telling and probably kind of a standard issue viewpoint. You know what I mean?
I do.
So I wasn't even going to go in there and talk about vegan straight edge itself. I was just going to talk about the the carnage that's involved with the drug cartels in Mexico and Colombia and in other parts of the world. How it's literally destabilized regions of those nations. Judges with their throats cut and their families slaughtered. Police, shot in the broad daylight in their patrol cars, or their families victimized. So because the fire has been allowed to burn, this is where we are. I think things are much, much worse than they were in the 80s or 90s. And the pharmaceutical companies have done an incredible job of convincing the public that they have this disorder or that disorder and they need these prescription medications. And a lot of them are, I mean, are honestly no different than meth. They burn people's brains out.
Yeah, and with respect to that, and to join on to what you're saying, I think that you pointed to something that was it's a component of capitalism. I think is what you're I think correctly pointing out, is that if you incentivize somebody to make money off of this thing that does not advantage someone, then it's fair to say that that's the root cause of the issue. Is that fair to say?
Yes, it is not advantageous. It is absolutely detrimental. It will set them back because if you're feeling anxious or angry or frustrated or upset, those feelings are there to motivate you to get out of whatever situation you're in.
Mm.
And narcotizing oneself and numbing oneself to try and escape from those feelings, I think will only compound the problem. And one of the things that we predicted with Firestorm and with the lyrics, I think, was that eventually there will be people's uprisings against the drug tank, against the people that are bringing it into their communities. And in a lot of instances, there's corrupt police involved, and there's street gangs that are doing the bidding of the cartels. And and I understand the the crisis that is poverty and the mental illness and the frustration that is a component of that that drives people to risk imprisonment or to risk themselves being shot over a lucrative corner. I understand all that stuff, and I understood it then because I grew up in the city. I did not grow up in the suburbs. And for me, it actually turned out to be kind of common. I saw it happen with a lot of my friends. They were into skateboarding or motorcycles, and they, were kind of adrenaline junkies. And I would say a solid half of the guys that I grew up with always used drugs. They always drank, they always got high, but they were our friends. They were part of our group. But when they started to get a little older, some of them started getting involved in the drug trade itself. And they were in Europe and they were moving drugs around on trains. They were basically smugglers. And I thought, I never want to be a part of this. Write this song. I'll never be a part of it.
And that opting out from that entire system, that has to feel like it allows kids agency. Could you see a little bit down the road and see the impact that that was going to start to have and start to influence kids to like see the perspective that you were trying to talk about?
Well, here's the thing. I tried to start Earth Crisis when I was 18, and it took a couple of years of finding the right people who shared the same views and were proficient enough with their instruments, who could compose the kind of music that I wanted to write with me. And through a miracle, I found Scott, and then Ian, and Dennis, and finally Eric. And they had some similar experiences to mine growing up, so we really locked together, ideologically and musically.
Mm-hmm.
And seeing the band as, not a pastime or a hobby, but as a mission, it really snapped into focus right around then. And we thought, we are very obnoxious, very disorganized skater kids from the hardcore scene.
Yeah.
But this this band and this message is more important than just something to entertain each other and our friends. Like this is something we need to carry forward and take seriously. So we did. We saw ourselves as ambassadors of an idea.
Mm-hmm. And in many ways,
Hope, and we hoped that vegan straight edge would become a movement, and there would be bands in every city for people doing zines or documentary films or writing poems or doing paintings. We wanted it to incite more art.
In retrospect, did it go as far as you wanted it to?
In some ways, yeah, I think so. I mean, there's vegan straight edge bands all over the earth now, and it's gone on for well over 30 years, so it's here
Hmm.
to stay. And we know people that have sailed with the Sea Shepherds or been involved with animal liberation front style direct action. We know people that have, in their own ways, fought back against the drug play. Also have friends that grew up to be police or doctors and nurses. So it is kind of amazing to see what's happened in 3 decades. But at the same time, I think society as a whole is learning to live with the cancerous tumor that is the drug play rather than trying to take the necessary steps to remove it.
Who do you think? I have my
And
own answer.
I don't think we should. I don't think we should be trying to learn to live with the tumor. We should be extracting the tumor.
Right. And the quickest, is it fair to say like the quickest way to do that is to convince people like just just stop. Is it fair to say the easiest way to dry up the drug trade is to say stop doing the drug that they are literally killing people over, you know?
Right. Yeah, and I'm not talking about like the lower level party drug. It's not what I'm talking about. My concern is, the crystal methamphetamine, the crack, the heroin, the fentanyl, the things that are not just reducing people's quality of life and ability to function as be a part of society or a family or a business. Like those drugs are literally killing people,
Right.
and they create chaos in the streets and filth and crime. And a lot of it, like I said at the beginning, it is untreated mental illness. So I think that would be one of the first steps. Because the pharmaceutical companies got everyone convinced that, rather than going into a hospital and having people have actual therapy and taking their medication on time so that the cycle and the equilibrium is flowing and people are level and stable,
Mhm.
they basically said, well, so and so will be fine. You can pick this up at the drugstore. And some of the
Oh, I think I might have lost you there for a second. Yeah, sorry, that connection got spotty for a second there. Are you still with me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, perfect. Sorry about that. Don't know what happened there, but I did hear the lion's share of that answer. I wanted to clarify. So, what are some of the biggest? What do you see some of the biggest cultural drivers? I know that you've spoken, I think, incisively about the economic factors, which are the largest ones, but there are cultural ones, I think, and it's a normalization of doing drugs, living a party lifestyle, getting drunk all the time. Like these are things that are part of that message. Are there certain nexus points of that ideology that you see or that you can probably point to?
Well, I mean, I think that the 1% is a very real thing. And what they're up to is affecting life in the West and in all the first world countries. And when you look at like how high the taxes are and how stringent the regulations are, and the de-incentivization of being a part of a couple or a family, it's all there. So it makes me wonder if there is something wider at work than simply, oh, society is changing because technology is replacing jobs, and basically every city in America is turning into a vacant mine and a ghost town. As we shift from,
Great
I guess,
imagery.
industrialization to whatever will be next. So like a city like Detroit or Flint or Syracuse or Buffalo that was based off of manufacturing, those jobs are done by robotics, or they've been brought to new factories overseas where people work for less money. I mean, that's left a lot of people kind of standing out in the cold. And I think that's a part of it too. It destroys relationships, it destroys families, it destroys communities. And when all that happens, I mean, people are stranded and they're miserable. So they're gravitating towards alcohol, they're gravitating towards drugs at an accelerated rate.
Mm-hmm.
And all it takes is 2 or 3 generations before it becomes completely normalized. And that's where we are.
I guess I want to talk a bit more about the actual like the story behind the creative process of it. But I find this was the part that I was actually really looking forward to, is seeing what your commentary on current issues would be, because that's the stuff that really interests me. So, at the risk of burning through time, I want to ask one last question on that front. Some argue that punk should be dangerous, subversive, resistance, while others see it as merely as a form of expression and activism. I don't know that I buy into a binary, but I do wonder if if you had to choose which side of that coin you would land on. I'm curious which you would prefer to see in coming generations of punks or hardcore kids.
My focus is on vegan straight edge. So I can't really speak to the rest of it. I would
Mhm.
definitely consider ourselves part of New York hardcore. And I absolutely loved and was influenced by Discharge and Concrete Socks and Conflict and Crucifix and all those bands. I loved what they had to say. I loved what Judge and Youth of Today and Department of Youth Services had to say. And I also loved the first handful of Slayer albums and Metallica albums and Testament. So those are where a lot of my ideas came from as to how I was going to conduct myself and what kind of path I wanted to walk through life. And it obviously influenced my stylistic approach to music. It's kind of an amalgamation of all those things. But there's all different kinds of punk and there's all different kinds of hardcore. But my primary focus is on nurturing the vegan straight edge scene. So, I mean, whatever happens outside of that is up to the people that are in those bands, what directions they want to take. But I think one of the things when I was younger that drew me to hardcore was it felt more like they were offering solutions and punk was just kind of the complaint department.
That's that's really good, actually. Yeah, yeah, that works. That works for me.
But also, I mean, punk is where a lot of incredible comedy comes from. Like I've said this a million times in a million interviews, but before South Park, before The Simpsons, the Meat Men and Angry Samoans and all those, the Circle Jerks, all those kinds of bands, they're very witty, but they're also very poignant. And they had great things to say, but they were very clever and it was entertaining at the same time.
100%.
So, I
Yeah.
mean,
There's there's a lot of bands that made. You're right. It was a very elevated form of music and comedy, all in that combination. It's quite insightful messaging that they had. And with respect to, how did you go about, I guess, what was the process behind aligning yourself with people that you feel you could be in, like getting that roster assembled? It took years, literal years. So what was I guess, how did you do it? Put simply, how did you?
there was all kinds of interesting things going on within hardcore during that time. There was the Krishna Core, the Riot Girls were getting started. Straight edge was kind of at a low point all of a sudden. There was some, you know, right leaning and left leaning bands, but my goal was to keep it simple. Let's keep it simple and have a moral code of conduct and fight for the earth and animals and human rights and not gravitate necessarily to the right or the left, but kind of keep it at a balancing point.
When I was growing up, I'm in that generation that was like, around the early 2000s was when that was sort of like the apex for me as a kid emerging from high school. Straight edge for me had a more of a dangerous connotation because there was affiliations at the time with FSU and Hearts and stuff like that. So with that, do you think that did a great deal of damage to the movement, or do you think that that's a hiccup essentially?
Well, I mean, we're friends with the 454 Big Block guys. I mean, we knew Elgin and all the original FSU guys, and their goal was to protect the scene from racists and drug dealers and bullies of from A to Z. And I think they did a good job. What went on with it after them, I'm not sure. I don't. We don't live in Boston. We live in Syracuse, but I think all those guys were absolutely on track, and we had a lot of very, very similar beliefs. But I do think straight edge needs its claws and fangs. That doesn't mean that we need to judge other people. I play in three different bands, and in one of them, I'm the only straight edge guy in Apocalypse Tribe. And all the guys I grew up skating with, same thing. I'm the only straight edge guy, still friends to this day. But I think one of the things that was going on around, you know, the mid 90s up to the 2000s was I thought society was going to literally disintegrate. I mean, after like Ruby Ridge and the attack on the Move compound in Pennsylvania or Waco or the riots in Los Angeles, I literally thought that it was going to, we were going to see a societal collapse. So I was very much focused on build the tribe, build the tribe. And I still am. I mean, it wouldn't surprise me if it happened. I mean, people really take the bait when it comes to the divide and conquer propaganda.
Yeah, I think more than ever, that polarizing thing is. I mean, we're more. It seems everyone says we're more polarized than ever, but I don't see any solutions except for in these communities that say live your life in a certain way.
Right. And my thought is this, one of the beauties of New York hardcore was and you would see a Hare Krishna monk in an orange robe and that traditional adornment, standing next to a graffiti artist, standing next to a straight edge guy, standing next to a skateboarder from the suburbs, standing next to a metalhead, and when the song kicked in, everyone was moshing and singing along and having a great time. And granted, that was not the beginning of New York hardcore, but that was what was going on in Syracuse, in Buffalo, in Albany, down in the actual city itself by the time the mid 90s was rolling around. And that's great. And I hope that never goes away. I think that's important to have that kind of unity. And there's a lot of people trying to poison that, unfortunately. But we do. We need to be a tribe, and it's not about what specific style of music you like or whether you're a gym rat or you're tattooed from head to toe or what have you. It's not about the aesthetics. It's about let's focus on the commonalities and stick together. Because in my heart of hearts, I do think that we're on the verge of a collapse. So we need to be a tribe.
And what other, I mean, other than having an album that I think has been more widely agreed upon than a lot, it's one of those albums that I have again seen it goes across. There's crossover there you know? And other than yourselves, can you point to anything else that brings that tribe, that circles the wagons and brings people closer together?
Well, I think what I'd like to just kind of touch on would be the songs itself on Firestorm.
Yes.
Forging the Flame was about straight edge being a lifetime commitment to never touch a drop of alcohol, never take a puff of a cigarette, never take any type of illegal narcotic for escapism, and to live through that as an individual and as a group. And Eden's demise was about the connection between kindness towards animals and veganism and environmental protection. Unseen Holocaust was about how the some of the last free peoples in the Amazon were having their lands destroyed by ranchers and mining and logging corporations, and the government was putting roads in, and they were doing burns and dams and runoffs were destroying things. And I mean, any tribe that has learned to survive in an environment that hostile and self-replicate and maintain a culture is something that needs to be preserved at all costs. So it was about indigenous people's rights and the struggles that they face, and we live on the edge of the Onondaga Nation and on the Iroquois tribal lands. So that's something that we all grew up understanding. And for Firestorm, again, I think the only thing that will stop the drug plague, it's not going to be police or courts or programs at school. It's going to be a change in consciousness and a people's uprising against the plague itself. And we've seen that. I mean, that's happened. It's happened in Ireland. It's happened in parts of Central America, parts of South America. And I mean, people can Google these groups, direct action against drugs and dairy, or the Shadow in Central America, or the original Black Panthers in the late 70s,
Hmm.
or the early 70s. Sorry.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's already happened and it's increased. But I just wanted to say the reason why this stuff matters to me is because there was not much of a hardcore scene here when I was younger. So I grew up in a punk scene, and we lost friends to addiction. And I played in a band with some of my friends from New York and from Detroit called Behemoth Serenade, and we lost our drummer Paulie to drugs. So this is something that has affected me, you know, and not my immediate family, but other relatives, and it's personal to an extent. It absolutely is. Like when you lose a friend to addiction, there's not just a sense of loss, but there's also a certain modicum of anger that accompanied it towards the people that were feeding that addiction for profit, and the callousness that they must feel in order to do that, to watch someone wither away like that until the point where they die.
And listening back to it, I mean, I guess asking you whether listening back to the record, but listening to it today, have you lost any of that anger that you felt at that time?
No, because like I said, I feel more anger now because I feel like it's gotten out of control.
Mm.
Like we were trying to tamp it out, but it's raging now.
And so, with this anniversary of it coming up, I have to ask, like, what are, as a band, next steps? What do you see for the immediate and long term future?
Well, the band is the future. I knew by the time I was 18 years old, once I learned how to play my bass and write songs and lyrics, that music would be what would remain my primary focus. And I'm 52, and we just put out a new Earth Crisis record called Vegan for the Animals. And Eric and I are always working on new material. And I've got another band called Freya. We got an album coming out this year. And Apocalypse Tribe puts up a new song every month. So music will continue to be the primary focus for me. You know, it's more than just, something fun to be involved with. Like, I feel like I'd go crazy if I wasn't kind of venting this anger out of myself, or at the same time trying to hopefully offer some solutions.
And I think that that absolutely is true for not just myself, because I've known and seen and felt that impact, and I'm glad that I get to share that with you. That you have had in that in to that degree, I've had that impact on myself, but also for so many other people. So I know that I'm not alone when I say we're looking forward to more of it, and we look forward to I look forward to being able to see it live.
Awesome. Yeah, and thanks to everybody that just came out and saw Earth Crisis last year and this year, and Long Island and Philly and Boston and Buffalo, and the Syracuse show was really fun. It was. It was fun. So
I hear it was pretty
we're
mental.
looking forward. It was wild. A lot of people got hurt, unfortunately. Old guys, gonna happen. But we've got some shows coming up. Oh, and Alabama was fun. Yeah, so we're playing This Is Hardcore, and we've got some other stuff coming up this year. So we'll be out there.
We looked forward to it, and I want to thank you again for speaking with me first of all, and for continuing to just be as prolific as you have been, and yeah, looking forward to more coming from yourselves in the near future.
Awesome. Thank you.